Hi, I'm Derek Morrison, and welcome to another episode of Bring Your Own. Women have been leaders and innovators in the world of wine for generations, but we wanted to take an episode to celebrate some of the most inspiring matriarchs of the wine world. Joining us for this special episode are Sandia Chang from Bubbledogs and Kitchen Table, Caroline Brangé from Stannary Wine Co, and Doug Wregg from Le Cave de Pyrene. We're really fortunate for them to bring some special bottles of wine from their own cellars to share with us today, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. Special thanks to the great team at Luca Restaurant in Farringdon for hosting us in their private dining room for the filming of this episode. You can find them online at luca.restaurant. If you enjoy the episode, please take a moment to give a review online. Follow us on social media at BYO Podcast and share this episode with your friends. Hi everyone, thanks for coming tonight. Let's go around the table with some quick introductions. We'll start with you, Doug.
I'm Doug Wregg. I'm a buying director for Le Cave de Pyrene, do a bit of writing as well. And I'm a veteran of one episode of this.
Welcome back.
I'm Sandia Chang from Bubbledogs and Kitchen Table, mostly focusing on champagne, but I drink pretty much everything.
And Caroline.
Thank you for welcoming us today. I'm Caroline. I work at Stannary St Wine Co. We are Burgundy specialists, and we have a good tendency to try and find Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from around the world. And at Stannary, I also lead the Women in Wine events, where we try to focus on women-only events, but also try just to get a woman around wine.
So for today's episode, we wanted to celebrate some of the world's great women winemakers, and everybody's brought some special bottles that I'm excited to share with you and to hear a bit more about why you brought them and about the growers who make them. So we'll start with a little bit of a Palate Awakening from Sandia. So you want to tell us what you brought?
So very typical of me, I brought champagne. I hope nobody minds. I picked Francoise Bedel. I actually had a hard time picking a female producer because there's actually a lot now in champagne. I mean, it's great. And I picked Francoise Bedel because she's got such a nice story. She's like she is a mother, but when she was a single mother with two sons, one of the sons, Vincent, was diagnosed with a serious illness when he was younger. And she took him everywhere, to every single doctor she can find to find a cure for him, and nobody could cure him. Eventually, she was recommended to a neighbor of hers who was a homeopathic doctor, and eventually cured him through natural medicine. And ever since that day, the next day it was told she went into her vineyards, took every single chemical out of her winery, nothing was used in the vineyards. Since then, everything has been organic and biodynamic, and I think the last couple of years his son has now taken over, so she's working side by side with him, which is great. It's a nice touching story. Mostly Pinot Meunier, 90% Pinot Meunier in this. And this cuvée is a 10 secret. It's a secret. It's 90% Pinot Meunier, 5% Chardonnay, 5% Pinot Noir. Her style is always long lees aging. So this is 2008 vintage, disgorged in 2016. So always at least 6 years for this cuvée on the lees. I always think it's fantastic to have like a super sort of rich style of champagne, bit of sherry notes in there, some hazelnut skins. It's a lovely food wine too, to match with like main courses, Sunday roast. It's great with Sunday roast.
You've been practicing.
Yeah. It's the Marne Valley, so Pinot Meunier. I always think Pinot Meunier is like the loser in school, you know, the schoolyard. Sorry, did you middle? You know, when we're trying to form, we play dodgeball in school. Do you play dodgeball here?
Yes.
Yeah. So you know, when you're trying to make up a team in dodgeball and you don't have enough people on your team, you pick Pinot Meunier because that's the only person left on the schoolyard that nobody wants to kind of play with. But you use him because you wanted to fill a team. But I think nowadays people realize how special it is, and it's one of those sort of rough around the edges kind of characters. To me, it always reminds me of spices, you know. And this is very typical, like almost anisey, licorice. I always think rye, toasted rye, you know. And people have grown to love Pinot Meunier.
I like that. It's the Michael Jordan of the grape varieties. You know, last picked and cut from the basketball team, and then grow up to be the star. That's cool. In Canada, we say like the alternate on a curling team is kind of like our expression. Which they have those.
Exciting. But Francoise, she's still very active. I think all sort of motherly winemakers tend to not leave their baby to their kids very easily. She's always there. I go to the annual April champagne tasting. She is the mother goose. Like, she speaks in a room of 100 people, they all stop and listen to her. So she's quite a character in the...
So for me, obviously, I couldn't be further from a female, great woman winemaker. I'm a young man, not so young man from Saskatchewan, Canada. But, you know, and it's very, I wanted to avoid kind of getting into the, you know, the low-hanging fruit and just kind of miscategorizing this conversation because, you know, there's been some absolute some of the trailblazers as vignerons and wine growers in the world for decades have been women. It's not like this is a new phenomenon to a degree, but I think it's still important to highlight some of these great growers because I think in today's context, when obviously issues around equality and in society on a larger scale, I think it's so important to highlight some of the accomplishments of so many great growers that are doing it now, whether they're new initiatives or new to their ventures, and also kind of some of the conversations we'll have later about some of the people who've blazed trails before. But what do you think is some of the most, how do you weave some of these people together in some sort of context? And so I kind of just, when we say great women winemakers, what does that inspire to you, or why is that something we should be sitting around talking about?
Well, I don't want to caricature it as a woman winemaker, but as a person who's a woman who's making wine. But presumably, there have been difficulties for women to get ahead in a world which is dominated by men, and wine still is. I mean, we import wine from some very patriarchal countries, and there are virtually no women making wine in those countries, or they're not really allowed to sort of present themselves as making wine, even if they're helping. The wine I'm showing is from Oregon, which is obviously a very liberal, enlightened place, and women have a very powerful place in the Oregon wine industry, but it wasn't always the case, and I think women have probably had to fight that much harder for recognition. They've probably had to deal with a certain amount of sexism when they're, especially small growers, when they're applying for loans from banks. I'm sure they're facing a great difficulty from men in suits who believe that they don't have the wherewithal or the stamina, or might have children and might get distracted. So, I mean, all that's inherent or ingrained in a patriarchal society anyway. I don't think that impacts their ability as a winemaker, because that's obviously to do with your skill as a farmer on the one hand, and your skill as a winemaker on the other, which is about knowledge and whatever. So we're never going to be talking about feminine wines, even if we even use that term sometimes, which I'm not averse to using that as a descriptive term, but I know how facile it sounds sometimes. But I think it's more the circumstance that a lot of women have had to sort of maneuver through, and the difficulties, the logistical difficulties setting up a business.
I think over the last 20 years it has come up a lot more on the surface that there are female winemakers, that they've been making the wine for 30 or 40 years when male couldn't be there, or and they're just coming up more on the front scene, whereas before they were hidden behind the Domaine's name. Now we talk about the Domaine, but we also talk about them, and we put them forward. I think it's more forward nowadays.
I think it's just time changing in general. It's a natural progression of evolution of both like humans and also technology. Nowadays we can all work from home. A lot of things can be done from home. Therefore, women, it's easier for them to do things, because even if they look after kids, they can still work from home. And gender equality. Now men stay at home and look after kids, and women can go off, and that's okay. more and more so. Okay.
In my house, for the betterment of my daughter, anytime I'm left alone with her, I feel a bit like I'm compromising her. Like, no, I'm kidding.
But I think, from a hospitality point of view, from the restaurant world, we see more and more female in the industry as well. And I don't think it's because we or men or people allow it. I just think because it's the popularity of the industry that's creating more female. The ratio is still big, to men to female, but in general, it's just more popular. And I think the wine business is the same. My father thinks it's because we haven't had a great war in decades, and because there's no war, things like this it's enjoyment. It's not something that's necessity. Therefore, there's more and more different wines being made because everybody's just enjoying life. Nobody's saving to save their family. So with that comes with more opportunities for women to get involved, I think.
I think more democratization, as in like barriers of women staying at home, as you say, or back in the 60s in France, you had to get married in order to leave your parents' home. It was quite rare. If you were from the countryside, it was quite rare to be living on your own, having your own flat, and evolving in the society, getting to do what you want. You still had to get married to get out, otherwise it wasn't working. And there's a word in French, émancipation. I don't know if that's the same in English.
Yes.
Like get your freedom to do what you want. And today we have the result of it. And I feel very lucky to be part of this generation where every door is opened. And we can be somms, we can have responsibilities, be in charge of a wine list, lead the life and enjoy the wines and buy the wines that we like without any limitations, more or less. And I think for winemakers, I guess the same happened, and now there are even more in the scene, and it's great because I think there's a difference as well between female winemaker and male winemaker. Sometimes still the vines speak for themselves, but there's a care and attention that can be a bit more focused. The wine that I brought is quite in that direction, I find, where father used to make the wine, they were a bit austere, and now we're moving towards more elegance or more approachability, I would say.
My wife has a better palate than me. A much better sense of smell and a better sense of taste. What she doesn't have is, inverted commas, the education in terms of having gone to wine school or done courses. Had she done so, she would probably be in wine, and I wouldn't. But actually, coming back to what is the reason for emancipation is education. People going to further education, higher education, going to wine schools, doing science degrees, and all the things that probably women weren't doing sort of 30, 40, 50 years ago, it's now changed completely. Women can do science, women can be analytical, women, can make wine. We're not surprised anymore. But there's always. And then, of course, there's another tradition of the families, handing on to the son or the daughter, whoever wanted it more, or splitting the estate in two. So we're now at that point whereby a lot of estates in Burgundy particularly split between the son and the daughter, and then they take it in their different directions. And I wonder if it's like an intellectual decision. Well, obviously it's partly an intellectual decision, but we're talking about farming and biodynamics. Isn't that a sign of humility as well? Is that it's really the vines and the place that make the wine, and not the person and the ego who does it? So I'm particularly thinking of Kelley's wines, which I'm going to show later. It's never about I. I never comes into it. I find this is an incredibly important lesson to learn, because I always use the word winemaker. Well, once upon a time, I never used the word. It's now vigneron. It's someone who is nursing the vineyard and is in tune with nature. And I think you've got to take a step back from your ego and be quite humble to realise that how important nature is in the whole winemaking process. And I think women are, maybe they're quite the people you've reduced. I think they show that actually it's more important. It's not an obviously logical thing to do to make the transition to biodynamics, even if you thought it was going to, make better wine and maybe even more expensive wine. It's actually a big sort of I think it's a big sort of instinctual decision as well.
So, in my life, I wish that I could be more articulate about the things that I see and experience and feel, but more often than not, the most profound things I've experienced in my life and moments are beyond the words that I can effectively capture them. But I think that there's always something important about those moments, and so they always stick with me, even if I can't articulate them. And anytime I've met Elisabetta Foradori, I have that same kind of experience. She's really inspiring, enchanting. I don't know what it is, but she's just, you can tell when you're with her that she's a special person in the world. And that has, there could be no wine on the table. It almost has nothing to do with that. But I think all of the wines that she makes kind of capture some of that essence. And her story of, I think she took over the winery from her father in 85 or 86, somewhere in there. And it was, she was quite young at the time. She'd been working with fairly commercial industrial producers in the region, and the way that she kind of transformed the domain, the way that she's kind of championed not only for her own domain in the region, but to really be a leader in biodynamics and working sustainably in the vineyards. I think she's just been such an important person to not only the Dolomites and that region in Italy, but across the world in the way that she has really had a massive impact on so many people. But her wines are just really special. I was at the Domaine at the winery with her last year on a trip with a few other people from the UK, and we got to taste some old bottles from the cellar. But just everything about that experience is really inspiring. And you visit the vineyard, you see some of the composting and all, just the vibrancy of each vineyard, and then you visit other producers in the region, and you just hear the reverence that they all have for her is pretty special. And if you talk about what makes a winemaker great or what makes a winemaker special, some of these things I think speak to the things that I can't quite articulate. And this wine in particular, I could have brought any one of her wines. There's not a bottle of Elisabetta Foradori's wines that I taste that doesn't really excite me. The Manzoni Bianco or Pinot Bianco, the Nociola is an absolutely beautiful wine. All of the wines have such a distinct personality, but they're all really exciting. And this is and Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a new cuvée. I think 14 was the first release that she did.
Yes, this is not actually made from her vineyard, but a biodynamic vineyard of a friend, which is about 80 years old vines in a really wild place. Actually, the name Fuoripista means off-piste, means like literally out of sight, out of mind vineyard. And it's a very wild and very beautiful vineyard, but obviously appeals to her love of biodynamics.
So I haven't tasted the 15 from bottle yet. The last time I tasted it was from Amphora at the winery with her. And so this is pretty cool, but even then it was just so vibrant and energetic. And so I'll let everybody taste it before I kind of say anything more about it, because I think that's important.
It's great.
The color is so beautiful. It's very sort of like, sort of transparent, and yet there's depth to it. But it's a subtlety. Like you mentioned the Nociola and Manzoni. These are wines that you creep up to them, and you don't sort of. They're not forcing themselves upon you in any way. You have to sort of be open to the subtleties, the nuances of the flavors, and it's made in this sort of wonderful. I think there's a patience about when you make wine in amphora, and an incredible delicacy and a coolness as well. The wine sort of suggests coolness. The color suggests coolness, the shininess of the wine, but it also on the palate.
This wine for me. When I heard about this wine, I was excited to taste the wine, and then when I first had it, it was so far from what I expected. I mean, we know Pinot Grigio is a gray-skinned grape. Some maceration, you can extract some of this color, and so we can feel that in the wine. We can see that in the wine, that there's obviously some skin contact and skin maceration. But what I think surprises me in from the textures and softness and finesse of this wine is it's 6 months on the skins. It's 6 months on the skins in amphora. So it's, when you think of these kinds of long macerated skin contact wines, you tend to find wines that are have a bit more texture, weight, and power, in not necessarily the most finessed way. And so for her to have just kind of had the vision and interpretation to have created this wine and have it come out with such finesse is something that I always think is really special. And I think it epitomizes the kind of the delicate hand and elegance of all of her wines, and I think to achieve it in such a way that when you think about 6 months on skins in amphora wines, I think our first recollection or first thought is going to be something that's not nearly as elegantly constructed as this. So.
I think it's interesting how Doug pointed out how it looks. I've never even thought about looking at a wine and determining the coolness or the energy. Like that color is, there's some sort of energy in that color. I don't know.
It holds the light, doesn't
it?
Yes,
it's like a diamond, like a nice diamond that's been cut right. You know, but diamonds are diamonds. Depends how you cut it, I guess, and the quality of the grapes, and that is pretty. That is a very pretty.
It's just even that that tannic structure. It's just so soft. I mean, but it's so fresh and vibrant and energetic, as you say. It's.
I try to describe it like this. You know, that we think of wine and we think of extraction of flavor, but think of it as infusion. Infusion sort of like is a totally different direction, and to me, it has obviously taken out some tannins and whatever, but no, it feels like harmonious, and that's more of an infusion. It's it's one thing as opposed to lots of little things.
Why do you think people made Pinot Grigio white in the first place?
Because they're harvesting unripe grapes. That's maybe not originally, but I think that's the reason we've had so much bad Pinot Grigio from Italy for so long. Is that's the association became with this high. How big can we yield this? How cheap can we make this? And it can be fairly neutral and fairly pleasant at the worst of its expressions. But I think at the best of its expressions this is on the one end of it. But I think a friend of mine in the Okanagan, Pinot Grigio is a very popular grape in the Okanagan Valley, and Carolyn was just there, in fact, actually tasting with her. And he does a little rosé it's 48 hours of Pinot Grigio, 48 hours on the skins, and it's just such a beautiful. So I mean, if you have the phenolic ripeness of grapes, if you're actually ripening your grapes properly, and you're making really quite pure fruit, then the grape actually lends so well to that kind of winemaking. But I think more often than not, it's both. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. I mean, an industrialized abuse of a grape perpetuates the diminished perception of its value in the marketplace, which further dissuades people from actually making low yield, trying to make wines like this, really, because it's so countercultural too.
But isn't it? It's a trade-off as well about acidity and texture. So for years we've been told acidity is necessary in wines, but there are certain grapes like Pinot Gris that when they ripen, they lose, all the acidity drops out. So what can you do without so much acidity? Well, you need tannin, you need some astringency, you need some structure, and I think in Friuli and Slovenia, they're used to working with some skin contact, and then they take it as the advantage. As the grape ripens, more color comes to the skin, you have more material to work with, you can make something which is quite considerable. Whereas if you're not going to do all that good farming and all that process, then you have to harvest as early as possible, press it, and then neutralize it, and you've got something which is, as you say, very industrial, but that's what white wines are, aren't they? They're just someone's pressing any old grape and getting clean juice, and then that's what they're beginning with. And it really, the grape becomes almost irrelevant. At least this is a celebration of the grape and the farm.
Mm-hmm. She simply understood as well. I mean, what I see through this wine, other than just the taste of it, is someone who's quite accomplished, who understood the grape variety, who understood what she could get from it if you push further than just the first step of making a white wine. And that's what is determination, and having an aim, and understanding your environment, understanding your vineyards, and that's what maybe women are good at, or what a good winemaker should be doing, whether it's male or female. And that's quite a brilliant wine. The color, the energy, as you were saying, the tannins that are there as well. I think it's. When you said Dolomites, I was like, wow, there's quite a bit of body and a lot of minerality as well. She's a brilliant winemaker, and it's good to have people like that who, other than just biodynamic, I think biodynamic comes from the love of your vineyard and looking after your vineyard, because usually it's people's backyards. They live next to it, so you don't want to put chemicals next to where you're going to live, I suppose.
I think when, if you spend time with her too, or you taste through different amphora and you taste through different barrels, and she's had an evolution as well. I mean, she's worked with kind of every kind of vessel, and in the last
you push for it,
10, 20 years.
But she was quite conventional once.
The
farming was conventional. The winemaking was very conventional. A lot of oak, a lot of new oak, very Bordeaux style, and that's how she established an international reputation. Yes. A bit like Thierry Germain, the Noir, is through extractive new oak style. Sommeliers loved it because it reminded them of Bordeaux, and then. I think here's a person who is liberated by biodynamics. Firstly, so focusing on the vineyard, rediscovering styles of wine that were made like traditionally, and her love of biodynamics and her greater involvement in the vineyard led to a total transformation in the winemaking approach. She became much more liberated. The wines became freer, lighter, fresher, purer. She sort of pretty well embraced more natural winemaking as well, and then came the amphora and the cement and getting rid of pretty well, except for the Granato, pretty well all the barrels, no new oak at all in the winery, and wow, it's incredible. Well, she's a happier person as well. I feel that she is now totally in tune with the wines, whereas before she was like doing it because it's a job, and now it's like it's an expression of her.
She was a very to be honest, I mean, from I think what she said, if I can recall correctly, I mean, she was working in a very technical, very kind of commercial, however we want to define it, in this kind of formulaic or this perspective, and then when she started to. I think it was some old Teraldigo vine. It was some old Teraldigo vineyards that she started to kind of work with and I don't want to say experiment, but started to apply some more sustainable vineyard practices. And really went from being these, almost unusable vineyards to thriving, vibrant, living vineyards. And then that kind of just, I think, cascaded and compounded as over years and years, and through the evolution that Doug said. And now, she has two other Teraldigo cuvées. That both used to be in barreled, then bote, then now both in amphora. And I've tasted some of the old bottles of off vintage 80s stuff that are not made in the way that she tasted, and they were just still stunning wines. So you can tell that there's obviously some, even with the shift in approach, there's always been a natural intuition or ability to interpret what's the growing process, but that I think things I've read and what she said, it was that kind of pointing to that moment with that one. I think it was a Teraldigo vineyard where it was kind of really an epiphany, where she saw the life come into it and that it started producing better and more healthily, and then this kind of fueled the moving more and more vintage over vintage and applying more kind of diversity and biodiversity to the vineyards, and then that just and now she's really become kind of a champion of natural winemaking, sustainable viticulture.
She really wanted to classify it. Sorry, yes. She really wanted to express the terroir diversity. So, and you're right about the Teraldigo, because she was making the Teraldigo, but the sort of two styles, lighter, more powerful, and then there was the Morée and the Scarzon. And when you taste them side by side, you have an epiphany as well. I mean, she had the epiphany, then you have it. You absolutely see why she decided to go down that more natural route, because she really wanted to express how versatile Teraldigo was, whereas before it was maybe a bit of a square grape, presented squarely, and now it's very nuanced. I think it would be so incredible to have seen these people at the kind of their origins in this kind of adventure, and when she started in the 80s to taking over, and to see now where you see her, she's just so relaxed. Her son's now taking over more and more, and she's kind of more hands off. But I just think that the evolution of people, whether they're women, whether they're men, any professional who can go through such a massive transformation and evolution and achieve so much, and then become such an inspiring figure to others is really inspiring for me. But I think it comes back to what you said earlier about that humility, that if you don't have a humble perspective, especially in this industry, wherever you work, then you're not going to have such reflections or epiphanies, I think. So Carolyn, do you want to tell us a bit of what you brought and the grower you brought?
I brought a Fixin. Fixin? Fixin Premier Cru Les Arvelets from the Domaine Denis Berthaut. It's not out of the context, but it says Denis Berthaut on the label, but it's made by Amélie Berthaut. Domaine Denis Berthaut was created in the 18th century. Not as Denis Berthaut, but it was a family. And then she's been passed on from generation to generation, sons over time, so that's why we still have the name. And then until Denis Berthaut, after World War One, the husband died a bit too young, and so the mother of Guy took over until Guy could take over, and then Guy's both sons decided to stay together in the Domaine, and then Amélie took over from her father in 2013 officially. So it's been passed on from generation to generation. Amélie's mother was from the Gerbet family, who is based in Vosne-Romanée. So nowadays the Domaine has some Vosne Premier Cru, Vosne Village, and some Échouzeaux from Lettreux. And so from her father's heritage, Domaine Denis Berthaut, there is some mostly Fixin, because they are based in Fixin itself, and they expanded between World War II and now with some Gevrey-Chambertin Village and Premier Cru. I really like what Amélie does. She's 26, and for me that's a sort of achievement, and I like to see the new generation arriving and embracing winemaking and respecting traditions and respecting family, and combining both, still making her style of wine but respecting what happened before, keeping the family's name on the label. From 2015 it says Berthaut Gerbet, so that both her mother and father are represented throughout the name of the Domaine, which I think is brilliant, because that's what should be done. We mentioned it earlier, where in heritage you used to have just sons taking over and keeping the family name on the label, and then whenever you were a girl, you were selling your land to your husband, basically, and sort of losing your name. So I think it's a nice nod to her mother, and I think she makes some great wine. Fixin is a sort of appellation that you don't always think about. You don't think there's a huge quality or huge potential, but actually, when you go to Premier Crus and even Village level, nicely located, you get some lovely concentration, a lot of power, soft tannins as usual with the Pinot Noir. But these vines were planted in the late 50s and 70s, so you've got vines that are very concentrated. The berries are really, really teeny tiny, so it's quite a small production, and you need to know how to handle that. I think you need to learn how to.
The wine's beautiful. I mean, it's got a beautiful texture, but it's very elegant and soft. I mean, it's I love the fruit profile. The tannic structure is so fine and velvety, but it's just.
I love the concentration of that wine. That's something you can easily lay down for 10 years and crack a bottle again, and you still have a lot of pleasure and still be fresh and young and really enjoy it.
I really like this appellation. I think it's like, it's underrated. People just don't want to move away from the big villages. No, it's great. It's always really good wines, great value. Yeah. It's amazing. Things I can afford. And I
love 14. For me, this wine is also very much 14. It's this finesse, it's not 15, it's not super dense, not overdone, not that I'm saying 15s are overdone, but there's just the right amount of depth and freshness. It's exactly the kind of Burgundy I like to drink. Nice. So this is like.
I love the crunch of 14s. That's a vintage that you can drink nowadays, and I love it.
They're just balanced, right? I mean, they're just in such. Who's it? Lots of people. Jaillet, I think, was great wine is always great wine. It's always like balanced wine is always nice to drink, and that's 14 for me.
I think you need to respect the vintage, but also I think it's been tempting for a lot of growers in Burgundy who've sort of looked at the sort of richer wines coming out of Bordeaux to sort of track the sort of maceration, to track the oak regime. And Pinot is such a gorgeous grape variety to have it emasculated effectively by new oak and by extraction. I think a cooler vintage brings out something which is really fine in a lot of growers, a good instinct. A warmer vintage brings out the worst instincts in some growers because they really believe that nature's giving them that much more material. But I think I always go for Burgundy in in 14 or 8. These are my favorite vintages because it's more linear and it still has amazing aging potential. But it's not so flattering. But the flattering is empty sometimes. So this is really delish. And the oak is beautifully done.
The finish on this is really quite nice as well because once that kind of the seductive nature of that fruit kind of goes away, you get a bit more of this kind of a bit of spice, a bit of kind of like kind of black tea kind of
tannins. There's good tannins at the end. Really great.
It's really nice. Yeah.
Like it.
So, Karen, I mean, this is a good point. So you work with these wines, obviously. I think it's interesting that you've brought like kind of what you think is one of the potentially next great growers, to kind of contrast with some of the other stuff. Can you tell us a bit about Stannary Wine Club and like what you're doing? Because I know you do lots of women in wine events, and that's been a big part of what you've been doing.
Yeah. It was the inspiration for having a focus on more women-driven events came from the fact that I, as a SOM or even outside of that, I attended or I was doing the service for BYO dinners and where it was usually, there's no blockage, it doesn't say men only on the invite, but mostly those events were just with guys and doing a BYO, bringing some fantastic labels and talking about wine all night, and that's something that I really enjoyed doing as well, having a nice dinner and gathering people who have a common interest in wine and sharing that and talking about it. But there was never a woman in that, and I'm like, what's stopping people from making the step and coming? And there's a big image of dusty, male-dominated and boring events that's attached to wine tasting sometimes, although it's changing. But I thought, you know what, let's just make a woman-only event like that, and maybe we'll have people interested. And sent out an invite and talked about it to other people, and I was surprised to see how successful it is. And we just did a trial one at our office, which went really well. We had Chiara Mondavi and Diana Sess coming for this event, presenting who did a BYO as well, which is pretty brilliant. And I was like, wow, let's move it forward. It's not about having a club. I don't want to have that image of just club and it's closed and it's just for women and building that barrier again. There's no need for that. I think it's just about having a platform where people can come. I say platform because it can be anything. It can be a bar, it can be a happy hour, it can be a dinner, it can be wine tasting, whatever inspires people, or whatever brings people together, and make it more comfortable for ladies to just express themselves. And we're not here just to show a beautiful label and have a trophy. It's about sharing a good bottle of wine with like-minded people, like-minded ladies, and do that. So lucky we are in good relationship with Jancis Robinson, who was really interested in the event because from her perspective as well with Purple Pages, there's a really low percentage of female subscribers, and that's why she actually liked our event and decided to host one with us. And so it was a BYO event, and the lineup that we had on that night was outstanding. And lots of Premier Crus, lots of big names, or we had some Comte de Vaugrange, we got some Coche du Riz, some Pierre-Yves Colin-Moret, and everything was 2011 and older. So, that showed me that there are women who have fantastic cellars, who do have the buying power, the interest, and who are just keen for this kind of events. And I was very, very enthusiastic about it. So, we keep doing regular events, either when we have winemakers around. So in January we did another one with Agnès Paquet and Delphine from the Domaine so it's quite a big négoce, but I thought it was great because it gives you another perspective. And every time it's about how it is to be a woman winemaker and or how it is to evolve within a male-dominated work environment. I like the ladies who come here for these kind of events. They all have a thirst for knowledge. They come to have a good time, but to learn something as well.
I mean, I think it pulls it back to some of the original conversations about, you know, the pains of living through a very patriarchal society. The old boys clubs of, I mean, London is one of the capital of old boys clubs and the historic center of it, and wine has been the lubricant kind of inside those walls for centuries. So you know, it's not really a surprise, I think, when we think of these events, not only drawing only men, but a particular kind of men. Generally, some of these events can be. So I think there definitely can be some of them. I don't mean to generalize too much, but some of these kind of this context of wine drinking can sometimes be a little bit too detached and far away from how I like to drink wine and what I
will generalize. Okay, I do an incredible number of wine events, you know, in shops and restaurants, wine bars, and I dread a mainly male audience. There's something about stags locking horns, and you know, like my opinion, or I've heard this. This is right. This is wrong. This is correct. This is the way wine should be made. Yeah, patronizing from people who have never experienced what it is to grow a grape or make a wine. So it's this sort of knowledge, this received knowledge, which is all about tradition and a perception that this is right and this is wrong. Whereas women, in my experience, incredibly open-minded, never had a row with with a woman at a tasting. Always the ones to ask questions and to offer an opinion in a sort of slightly more humble, questioning way. I'm not saying it is a generalization, but I've done enough now to be able to generalize from experience.
Yeah. The wine forum is a very it's a very popular forum in which male privilege can be demonstrated. And
I mean, wine is such a subjective thing. You know, everybody, whatever people say about it is always an opinion. You know, so when you have, you know, male, you know, it's all about who's got the bigger opinion.
Yeah, bigger something. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's when we talk about, you know, I think it's part of the reason that we talk about the inheritance of vineyards, the inheritance of domains is really has helped in lots of ways create and generate some of these iconic women winemakers historically and much ahead of the times of what we've seen in terms of ownership in other realms of business in those same decades. You both have worked through the industry in various different roles, and on this end of it, that you've really had to earn your roles based on merit and whatever else. Do you notice firsthand? I know both of you are involved with Stannary Club and Sandia. I know you do lots of different women in wine or women in hospitality events, and do you see changes, or do you see more of these kinds of clubs or associations or this kind of groups of camaraderie to kind of help work together as units? Or I mean, maybe just overall, do you see much has changed in your career in the industry working as a woman?
There is a lot more support because there are things that people just don't address. For example, you and a man and a woman, or a family having a child. It is nature that the woman has to bear the actual child. The physicality of it, it's never been really addressed in hospitality in general. What happens? What happens when the woman is gone for, a year? Can she work the floor? Can she sell wine? Can she, carry wine boxes, stock cages? She can't physically do it. So what do we do? But nobody's really addressed that because normally let's not hire her. Or she's not going to work out if she has a kid. Or as a woman, you're like, I can't have a kid. If I have a kid, I'll never get to, carry on my career.
You have to plan it.
Yeah, but more and more so. I recently went to a woman to the hospitality forum, and some lady in the audience brought up the point. She's like, I just opened a restaurant. I'm juggling a kid, you know, I'm right now I can barely breathe. What do I do? I couldn't answer it because I don't have that experience, but there was a few mothers in the room that was really insightful and supportive and said, you know, what you realize sometimes is that the world will go on. So if you don't answer that email that day because you have to take your kid or to the hospital or wherever, it's going to be okay. That email will not kill you. The world will not stop. But without somebody telling you that that's okay, you feel like it's not okay. You know, so I think with
yourself a lot.
yeah, so there's more support. I think it's better, and they will encourage more women to take, you know, steps that they never thought they could. Making wine, for example. What if they have to harvest? Who's going to look after the kid? You know.
Well, I wonder too if vineyard life and agricultural life in general kind of lends itself quite well to family, you know, in a sense. And I think there's both a harmony with the emotion, the energy, and also just the day-to-day tasks of what that does. I mean, obviously it's a lot of backbreaking work, and there's a lot of heavy manual labor involved with the things that you need to do to maintain vineyards or agriculture in any way. But you know, it's a difference of walking out your front door, taking your kid for a stroll through the farm. I mean, my family's background is all agricultural. No wine in Saskatchewan, Canada, mind you, but you know, I've spent my share of time in chicken coops and you know, and pea fields and things like that. And I think that in a sense lends quite well to it. But you know, it's interesting what you say, these associations. There is always going to be, no matter what state we get to, as you know, as a society, there's a unique set of challenges and burdens, or however you want to put it, that will never be shared in similar ways. And I think that's always going to create a unique perspective that's really quite interesting and valuable to, you know, every sector.
It's the nature of wine growing, though, and sort of winemaking, is that you are sometimes isolated, but you need help from others, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask. So every vintage, of course, people, it's the old-fashioned way. They get together. You know, you need extra help, or you need to bring your harvest in. Your neighbours will help you, or other growers will help you, and you will do the same for them. So I think, you know, increasingly we see that. You know, people do not work in isolation. We live in a community, and we need to support each other. Do unto others the golden rule of well, it's business, but of life itself, really.
So, Doug, you've broken the rules. You've brought in several of your own, but no. So, can you tell us a bit about the two wines you brought? Why you brought them?
They're both from one grower. They're both from Kelley Fox, and the reason why I brought two rather than one, the reason why I broke the rules, is because I wanted to talk about terroir and the articulation of terroir, and how the winemaker can sort of, in a way, immerse herself in the vineyard or express the difference between two vineyards so eloquently. And Kelley is an incredibly modest person, and she doesn't really like to talk about her wines, and I don't like to nail a butterfly to a wheel and overanalyze what is in the bottle, but I think the wines speak really clearly. Well, I think the vineyards speak really clearly. So I'm going to pour in the left-hand glass. This makes no difference when you're filming. My left-hand glass, the Mirabai, and I think if you can just look at the colour of it. So these are both Pinot Noirs, and they're from two different vineyards. And the Mirabai is from a vineyard called Marsh, which is actually spelled Maresh, and it belongs to a family called Marsh. And in the right-hand glass, just for a sort of contrast, look at the colour difference. 2015. Both 2015. I'm pouring the Momtazi vineyard Pinot Noir. So same vintage, both from Oregon, not a million miles apart, but look at the difference in the colour. The wines are made in exactly the same way. So to me, this is quite remarkable.
The first one looks like the Pinot Grigio from Foradori.
In fact, I think last year Kelley made a Pinot Grigio, which was probably darker than a Pinot Noir.
So how far are these vineyards?
So the first one, the one with the colourful label, this is the Mirabai, is Dundee Hills, and Dundee Hills. So we're in Oregon, we're in Northwest Oregon. Dundee Hills is renowned for its volcanic soil, which is called Jory, and it's quite deep soil, and it's very red soil. I can still get under my shoes to this day. It's sort of rusty red soil, and almost like a lot of iron, and but an oxidized soil. And the wines from the Dundee Hills always show this sort of like delicacy in terms of the color of the wine, not in terms necessarily of the expression, but certainly in color. So that's quite interesting. The one on the right is from McMinnville, which is, I suppose, like 20 minutes, half an hour away. Also volcanic soils, but it's different. So the volcanic soils here are really shallow. And this is very, very high bedrock of marine sedimentary. The vineyards are slightly different in terms of their exposure. It's a slightly cooler in the sense that it's quite close to a gap in the coastal range called the Van Duzer Gap, which brings in sort of cooler Pacific air. Whereas the marsh vineyard in the Dundee Hills, it's warmer. It feels warmer, and the wines present in a slightly sort of warmer way, warmer, more open. Momtazi, cooler, more mineral, more direct style. But Kelley makes the wines really identically. So her idea is not about extraction. It's really about capturing the unique voice of these particular vineyards. So Marsh is on own-rooted vines. It's the fourth oldest vineyard in this part of the Dundee Hills. The original vines were planted in 1970, and then there was another lot planted in 1976. It's dry farmed. This is the vineyard that Kelley spends a lot of time in, and really almost communicating with the vines. And I think what's so interesting and beautiful about what she does is her relationship with the vineyard. She knows every vine personally. She knows every row, obviously. And it's only 15 rows, but this vineyard has personality. It's a really wild place as well. There's so much nature. It's sort of throbbing. It's quite elemental. It feels warm, and like you can almost feel the heat coming off the soil as well. And again, it's something of that it gets captured in the ultimate wine itself. She seems to harvest later than most of her Oregon peers. I mean, I think this was harvested in the third week of September. This is really hot vintage, 2015. So she's harvesting quite late, so long growing season. And I think the wine, resultant wine is more harmonious. And then always hand-picked grapes. I mean, she does everything just by herself. She uses biodynamic preparations. This is not certified. This particular vineyard, the Momtazi vineyard, is certified. So yeah, it's very much, this is about nature. And then she's slightly changed her method of working. She wants something cool as well in the wine. So she uses 100% stems now, a whole bunch. Whereas I think when she started in 2007, it was about 20 to 30%. But Oregon is changing. It's becoming a lot warmer. Summers are a lot hotter now. And I think you've got to have an edge to your wine. What you don't have, which you have in Burgundy, we notice the natural acidity from the soils. Volcanic soils are not limestone, clay, or sort of schist or whatever. So we're lacking perhaps that element. So it has to be repaid in terms of humility and delicacy and purity. So let the wine speak. But she doesn't do any extractions or pump overs. This is really whole body bitesize, so she can be in a vat with the wine and not pushing it or pulling it or pumping it over. Not looking for color, as you can see. There's really very little color, and then an ambient ferment. No temperature control, native yeasts, free run juice. This is what it is. And there's something, I always find something silky. I don't want to say feminine, but you know what I mean? It's sort of like Volney-esque in terms of its open arm, open sort of to you style of wine. Almost soft, herbal, earthy. This is Marsh.
The beautiful wine. I mean, her wines always have this kind of just understatement to them. I always think that they're just really pretty is the low-hanging fruit, pardon the pun. I mean, they're really pretty wines, but there's always this precision, but softness, and really, I mean, I've only met her briefly at tastings. I've not spent any intimate length of time with her, but you really feel a bit her personality, that kind of understatement, that shyness in terms of the understatement of the wines that you see from her, because she's so modest. As you said, when you meet her at tastings, even when you compliment her on how beautiful the wines are, it seems to almost make her uncomfortable. That she doesn't, she's not obviously in it for the effusive praise, but there's just I love these wines we work with. We've worked with them for a couple of years since you introduced them to me, and I just think that she's such a great personality. And what got me into wine was seeing a winemaker's personality and how it kind of seemed to be so obvious in their wines, and then to meet other winemakers and see the same thing from very contrasting but similar wines. And so I think whenever I meet winemakers and I taste their wines, I'm always looking for that connection. And I think with Kelley, maybe because it's a very shallow analysis, but for me it seems obvious in the brief moments I've
But she
spent.
feels very connected, deeply connected. I mean, she would almost describe herself as volcanic, and these vineyards as volcanic, and it's about capturing the volcanic terroir of Marche. I mean, she talks about them as their people, and you only have to spend 1 or 2 days in each of these vineyards to recognize their very particular character. It's almost as though they do have their personality. And she's a very philosophical person, a very deep thinker, but also very much, I was going to say, a creature of nature. I mean, she's never happier than when she's talking to her vines. She loves the isolation. She loves being just in the vineyard. I've never met a person who spends so much time in the vines and just absorbing the landscape. You know, it's quite, that is, and who would sort of characterize, never talk about herself as a winemaker, but characterize the wines in terms of almost sort of in such poetic, spiritual terms. So, you know, Momtazi is a dragon, basically, or I can't remember what Marche is meant to be. But you see it when she talks to you about it, and you just absorb that as a lesson. And for me, she's she's sort of my mentor. I've sort of almost rediscovered wine after having met her. And she made me think of it in sort of different sort of terms, almost different colours, different shades, different depths of what it was all about, and made me think about the vineyard again rather than about winemaking. Winemaking never interested me as such as a sort of like a chemical transformation, but capturing the soul of a place and a vintage really became that much more important as far as I was concerned.
You can really see, I get it why you brought two. I mean, the context of the reference against each other. You both see the obvious uniqueness of each individual terroir, but then there's also undeniable the same fingerprints on both wines, which is what is quite exciting to see.
Do you think, I don't want to generalize as well, but do you think women make wine differently because just in nature women are natural born, you know, nurturers, because they nurture the next generation, that's what they do. So when they're in the earth connected, they make things to nurture people rather than to showcase certain things. And I know for a fact in the kitchen, because when I used to be a chef, that female chefs tend to cook because they want to give and because they want people to enjoy it, not so much because they want to be the big honcho in the kitchen.
That is exactly what she would say as well. Wines are to bring people together, but they have a sort of medicinal thing. You know, they make you feel good when you're drinking them. She is a mother, and she's also, for her, she is the midwife. You know, so she brings this to birth, and then she releases it, puts it on its feet, and after that, she doesn't really want to know about the wine. I mean, the wine exists, but it's nothing to do with her. She's done the hard work already, and it's really for other people to share and to express their opinion. What you can do is really sort of second guess. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Those sort of questions become really irrelevant, you know, because there's so much about the smaller picture, whereas the bigger picture is sort of what's in the glass, you know, how it is on the day. They're coils. They don't always sort of release, you know, in terms of their personality, like people, you know. Sometimes we're a bit shy, you know, a bit stumbly, and then sometimes we're eloquent and voluble. And these are so different, you know. And I think when I first encountered the wines, I was always loving Marche because it was just more transparent for me and warmer and sort of whatever. But now I've come to appreciate Momtazi because of it's an exhilarating wine. It has that minerality, it has that energy and that edge from. It's a stunningly beautiful vineyard, the Momtazi vineyard in McMinnville, owned by Mo Momtazi. He owns the whole vineyard, and they just look different, you know. Those places, and they just give different sort of soils because the wine is on because this is a Jory and Nekia soils on a high bedrock, so shallow soils. The vines penetrate deep and extract minerals. So these will always be darker wines, but there's also something very cooling and bright and energetic, whereas these are always like, as I say, earthier wines, more sort of like, easy.
And I want to highlight also, it's quite interesting that, this is of the other growers that we've had, the other three wines have been from France or Italy, and so to have something from the New World where it's a completely different, there's not the heritage or the inheritance so obviously in terms of generations of handover as we have in Burgundy in terms of how people come into their ventures or domains. And I think that there's obviously a unique set of challenges as a woman entrepreneur in the wine industry in Oregon relative to how that would contrast with someone in Oregon or in Italy or anywhere else, maybe in Europe. But North America is quite interesting as well because there's such a diversity of exciting women producing wine. From all ends of the spectrum, we can talk about Heidi Barrett, who's responsible for several vintages of 100 Point Screaming Eagle, which is the complete opposite of the kind of ethereal, finessed wines we're talking about, but profound to a certain audience of wines and acclaim that they've achieved. And then you have kind of the next generation, Kelly Fox, and then you have young winemakers in the same kind of league as what you're talking about, like Martha Struman and other producers that are coming up doing so many. It's such a massive. The spectrum is so broad in terms of that, and I think that is maybe one of the most important things for us to know if we're having any sort of relevant conversation about great women winemakers, is that great women winemakers are no different in terms of the kinds of wines they produce than great winemakers of any ilk. And we can talk about some of these ethereal expressions and these natural harmonies, but it should be important that anybody listening, if there's any sort of ignorant assumption that there's a way to define what a great woman winemaker's wines taste like, then that's as ignorant and limiting as it could be. But
I think there's a holistic thing to be made here. The reason why I brought these wines, I was always going to bring the wines, was that she's a farmer, but she's a winemaker as well, and so she sees the whole thing from the beginning of the of the vine to the bottling of it and the release of it, and does all the back of house administration. It's like one woman band, and I think the other thing to bear in mind is the scale of it. It's such a small scale project. Most women can't afford. Most women can afford to buy their vineyards. So she's lucky. She works with 2 fantastic parcels of fruit, and people who've sort of mentored her. She worked at Erie as she was the winemaker at Erie Vineyards under David Lett. So again, incredibly inspirational character. And then she channeled everything that is about her and her beliefs and her feelings about wine and what she loves to drink. Pommard, Volnay, Bartolo Mascarello. You can almost see it in the wine. This is what she loves to drink, and this is sort of like that sort of. I'm not saying that influences the final outcome. It's all part and parcel of what makes the wines the way they are. But really, of course, you couldn't do it without those special vineyards. And and she is, she's the opposite of ego. She is totally about listening and then channeling, I guess.
When we talk about what makes great wine, it's usually the intersect of great terroir and a great winemaker. And I think at the essence of what one of the core foundations of what is a great winemaker is that humility and ability to remove your own ego from the interpretation of what you're given. And we've shown some great examples today of some women who are very adept at doing just that. And as with always, we can only put 4 or 5 bottles of wine on the table at a time for one of these episodes. So it's never to be exclusive or limited to just what's on the table. But I think if we're talking about great women if we're talking about great women winemakers, all of the wines that we had today spoke quite eloquently to that. So thank you for bringing some beautiful wines and sharing some time with us. And thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks to Stefano and the team here at Luca Restaurant on St. John Street for the hospitality, and see you again soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please take a moment to share a review online or share the episode with your friends.